Hello and welcome to Intertextual Experience, where we're buzzing for the show's 39th guest, Connie Vogelmann. How are you doing today, Connie?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for making this happen. We were kind of chatting a little bit. I've been playing a lot of Apiary, and yeah, the amount of Apiary I'm playing is like increasing and increasing. So I wanted to reach out and chat with you a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Awesome. I have a couple things to like preface the episode with before really diving into you and the game a bit. So just yeah, I'll get them out of the way quickly. But bees are animals that I've heard enough about where I should probably know even more about them than I do, or at least be able to like recall some of that information. But my wife is a land manager for a local nonprofit conservancy, so she'll host, set up, co-host all sorts of events. So I've been to bumblebee surveys, I've been to different pollinator talks. I was at a presentation at a meadery that they keep their own bees and they make session mead from like their own honey and everything like that. So I've kind of been exposed to bees enough, but if I had to kind of like recall, it's just definitely more osmosis and less like super active engagement on my part. But all that said, I mean, I saw Apiary, it looked cool. I was excited to play it, but then some of the things that I had known and kind of know that would like these bee related touches that would pop up when I was playing just kind of like added to that, and the game is just so good. So yeah, that's kind of it. But before we kind of get into the show structure, uh, the initial question that I have for you is just about, what was your inspiration to get into beekeeping and then transitioning to where it's at now? And we talked about that a little bit
Yeah,
just a second ago, but yeah.
yeah, absolutely. So my grandfather kept bees for about 50 or 60 years, something like that. He started when he was a teenager and kept it up for his entire life. And so I have some very fond early memories when I was a kid of helping to like spin down the combs and bottle the honey and stuff like that. I mean, that's sort of the process where a little kid can sort of ostensibly help. I mean, it's basically a hand powered centrifuge that you use to spin the honey out of the combs. And so it was definitely something that was kind of in the back of my mind for a while. And then actually, starting to keep bees was a COVID project for me. It had been on my radar for a long time. My husband and I finally had a house we're in the middle of Washington, D.C. But we have like a postage stamp size backyard, and DC actually has really, really permissive regulations for keeping bees. So I got into it then because bees are just some of the coolest creatures on the planet. They produce this wonderful honey. It just sort of from both a kind of a scientific standpoint. I have a degree in biology, so I'm kind of coming from that background, and then also just from like a hobby standpoint, it was something that was really great to do. Sort of sad I don't keep bees anymore, which is a bummer. We were talking about this a minute ago, but I started getting more and more reactive to bee stings. And unfortunately, that tends to be you tend to go in one direction or another. If you're a beekeeper, when you keep bees, you're going to get stung a few times a year. It's just there's really not any way around it. I mean, you're opening up, if you're being an active and diligent beekeeper, you're opening up your hive at least 5 or 6 or 7 times a year, and there are 30, 50, 60,000 insects in there, all with stingers, and you're invading their home. Like, you're just going to get stung. And so unfortunately, each time I got stung, I started reacting a little bit more and more and more. So a year or so ago, I gave my hives to a new beekeeper, and so now they are quite literally out in a farm in the country.
That's awesome that the bees were able to get a new home and that they're happy. So like you're not able to keep them anymore. Have you been able to kind of like remain in good contact with the new home and
Yeah, yeah. I mean, as far as I know, they're still doing great. The turnover of an individual queen bee right now is very, very high. And that's beekeepers are still trying to kind of figure out why that is. Back 20 years ago, your queen bees used to live several years, and now they're really like you live a year or two. But often but you sort of get the descendants, the descendants of that hive. Chances are, I mean, if all goes according to plan, if a queen bee dies, the hive will be able to generate a new queen, and so the sort of the lineage lives on.
yeah. And with that being not being able to keep the bees anymore, have you tried to like fill that bee gap in any way?
It's that's actually sort of a good question. I'm actually trying to rediscover what some of my hobbies are. So a few weeks ago, I finally left my day job, because for the last few years, I've been basically doing two full-time jobs. I was an attorney for the federal government up to very recently, and so I was sort of doing that in the day, and then moonlighting as a game designer. And so my life sort of became playing games, designing games, and going to work. And so I'm actually just barely starting to restart and figure out like, okay, what are my hobbies? So now that I'm full-time game design, I actually have a little bit of time in the evenings. And so really all I've been doing so far is just catching up on all the sci-fi books that I didn't read over the last few years. But I'll figure out what's next soon.
Wow, that's awesome. And yeah, that's cool because well, kind of depending on the chaotic, well, hopefully not super chaotic structure for the questions that I have. I did have a question because I did know that you moved to game design full time as well. So maybe we can touch on that a little
Yeah,
bit
yeah,
more
absolutely.
in a bit. But so the the general kind of structure then is I have like questions synced up to the different actions in Apiary, and that's kind of like the hook. I typically
Yeah.
like overplan, so I try to really kind of pare it down to like one question per action, so it's not like sometimes I'll do like three and then have follow-up questions, and then it's like, oh, we've talked about two of the questions, so hopefully I can keep it on course. But
No, that
before
sounds great.
we
Let's do it.
get into that, then if you like, for anybody who is unfamiliar with Apiary, or even people who are just kind of hearing kind of how you describe the game and kind of some of the like the premise and mechanisms and everything like that, so that when we hop into the actions, it'll make even more sense. So
Yeah, absolutely. So Apiary is a worker placement game, published with Stonemaier Games. It started out throughout the design process being regular honeybees. I mean, it was you were going out and you were foraging in different fields and you were bringing pollen back. And then as I started talking with Stonemaier, Jamie Stegmaier was a little bit concerned about honeybuzz, that was a mid-weight worker placement Euro game starring honeybees. So we moved Apiary to space, which actually helped a lot. I mean, as I mentioned, I'm a big science fiction fan, and it also helped with some of the mechanisms. It helped to explain what you were doing a little bit better, and we can get into that when we talk about the actions. But in short, what you're doing is you're sending worker bees out into the world. The bees are these sort of four-sided square or sort of rectangular miniatures that have a number 1 through 4 on them. The strength of the action that you do corresponds to the strength of the number. And every time a worker comes back to you, it levels up in strength. Once they would level beyond a 4, they have to hibernate. So you're kind of mimicking this real life bee. The individual bees are going in and out, but the hive lives on. And then the other there's sort of two other key aspects. One, no worker placement space is ever blocked. It uses a bumping mechanism similar to Euphoria or Charterstone. So if I want to go to a space where you already are, I can go there, but then you're going to get your worker back. So it gives you kind of a benefit. So you have that positive player interaction. And then a lot of the actions are centered around building out your hive, which is a spaceship that is hurtling through space at some unknown speed. But so it's all hex based, of course, because it's honeybees. So you're building out tiles in your hive.
perfect. Now that sounds, I mean, that's the game, right? I mean, uh, very cool. So now, yeah, I hopefully, okay. We don't actually have to, we can kind of maybe go over what the main action is when we introduce the question, but my plan is we'll start with explore. This is kind of like the jumping off point, getting us out into space with the bees, and then from there you can select any action, and then I'll ask the question based on that. So you have the
Yeah.
choice just like a player would then too. But we will start with explore,
Yep.
and yeah, just making sure that I'm not going to misspeak, but we're looking at the board. Explore is going to be in the top left area of the board, and you get to. Okay, so that piece is the big queen ship miniature, like very,
Yep.
very fun player piece. And depending on the value there, kind of like you mentioned, for all of them is going to determine how much you can move uh, with the other bee that or any other bees that were previously there. But for this question, then I'm going to read the very first paragraph, like on the rule book, the story of the
Sure.
game, and I have a
Yeah,
question
yeah.
based on that.
And I did write all of that text way back in the day. So
Okay. Well, then you're going to fill in a gap then that
sure.
I or just like a headcanon gap. The
Absolutely.
the very first paragraph reads, "In a far distant future, humans no longer inhabit Earth. The cause of their disappearance, or perhaps their demise, is unknown, but their absence left a void ready to be filled by another sentient species." And obviously that is bees, but so that's pretty dark.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little dark. And I really thought about it. I was like, should I make this a little bit less dark? And I'm like, we're just gonna go with it. Maybe it's my like underlying nihilism about the state of the world. But yes, it's a little bit dark, but it also seemed like, from like an evolutionary and like an ecological standpoint, a lot of times it takes the destruction of kind of one dominant species for another to arise out of it. So it's like sort of thinking about it a little bit from like a historical standpoint. I mean, and I'm not trying to pretend the demise of humanity or anything like that, but just from like an evolutionary standpoint. I mean, you think about the rise of mammals, for instance, was very much attributed to the meteor strike that sort of really hit the reptiles hard because a lot of the dinosaurs had evolved to exist in a lot of those ecological niches. And so it basically took them going away for the mammals to basically become very dominant. And so I was sort of thinking like, okay, well, what kind of a thing could happen to cause this kind of evolution, or not cause, but lead to this kind of evolution among bees. And it's like, okay, well, let's say humans are out of the picture now. What might rise up to take our place? So it was sort of a fun thought exercise that ended up in maybe a little bit of a dark place.
Not super dark, but I guess so for you and your kind of, like imagination and visualization of this, do you feel like that it was just kind of a particular event, or did the bees have a part, or did they play a part in
No,
the
no. These are helpful bees. I mean, as
Okay.
we'll get to when we talk about explore a little bit, they're making the planets better that they visit. So I think this is really a self-insured disappearance on the part of the humans, and then the bees evolved to fill that niche. This is not destruction on the part of the bees.
Okay, perfect. Well, you did mention too. That's a very interesting note. So, like I said, on the whole, most of my question lines do only have like one or two things per action. So if you do want to like hop in and like, okay, we're on the explore action and you want to wind up describing a little bit more of, some of the bee specific things or choices, or even just game mechanisms that are happening to like add on, like just hey, we're moving on.
Yeah.
You can do that. So like for Explore, you mentioned, yeah, like you head to a planet and maybe there's a space for a singular resource, but then when you move the pawn back on there, then there's two or three, or depending on how many spaces are
Yeah.
available. So
Yeah, and that was sort of a relatively late add-on to the game, but I really like it conceptually for two reasons. I mean, one, it helps accelerate the game a little bit. So, like, as you're one or two resources at the beginning of the game might be great, but it's not really very exciting as you progress. And so having that um, accelerate over the course of the game, I think was really satisfying mechanically. But even more than that, it ties in with this theme of bees. It's a very friendly game. I mean, there's certainly racing for tiles and stuff like that, but most of the player interaction is this bumping, which is generally more positive than not. But it just contributes to this idea that like, well, bees are exploring the universe, but unlike a lot of like 4X games, they're not, destroying things. They're going to these planets, they're helping them, they're making them better, they're doing scientific research on the plant life that they find on the planets, etc. And one Easter egg that I'll just mention too is that all of the planets are named after different families and orders of plants. They're all shortened words because obviously some of the scientific names are very, very long, but all of the planets are named after different types of plants.
that is awesome. Like I said, my knowledge with bees and nature is it's mixed all over the place. I don't think I knew noticed that though, so I will keep
Well, they're all pretty short. I mean, so that'll be the first, 4 or 5 or 6 letters of a much longer word.
No, that's awesome. I'm glad now like any subsequent play, like I get to have it just kind of like reframed and like get to see it through a new lens, and I'm really excited because I'm in the middle of a couple games digitally, and I can, well, as you can see behind me, I can pull it out and play it whenever then too. So
Awesome.
I'll be
Yeah,
looking.
no, Yeah, I was just gonna say it's great that it's on Board Game Arena now. It's a really good, really good digital implementation of the game. And they also incorporated a couple little bits and pieces from the expansion. Not obviously the most of the expansion pieces, but they did do like the adjustments. We made adjustments to a couple of tiles with the expansion, and they did incorporate that into the Board Game Arena implementation, which is extra nice.
Oh, that's really cool. Yeah, I don't think I was familiar with that. I just kind of like fired it up and it was
Yeah,
going. So
absolutely. Most of the changes are pretty small.
yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so I I made you take the explore action first, and
Yep.
honestly, like I feel like I do that pretty frequently when I play. I'd
Yeah.
say explore is a relatively common first move for me. But now the that you're able to place a bee there, where is your next move?
So my next move in the game is almost certainly an advance action. I gotta start building out that hive. Maybe I pick up like a recruit tile, something like that. That's a good thing to pick up early. Your recruit tiles are sort of your ongoing powers. They're represented by in the game by sort of bees that are coming from different hives, kind of diplomats and stuff like that that are coming in and helping your hive. But they give you ongoing powers throughout the course of the game. So if you're going to pick up a recruit, it probably makes sense to pick up one soon. There's basically four types of tiles that you can add to your hive over the course of the game. There's your farms; those are your storage space, and they give you income. You have your recruit tiles, which give you ongoing powers. You have your developments; those cost wax, which is a refined resource in the game, but they give you powerful one-time benefits. Spoiler alert, those are my favorite tiles in the game. And then you have your end game carvings, and those cost honey. And those are sort of your biggest single source of points in the game. So it's all about figuring out which tiles to buy, what order to buy them in, your placement, because you do get bonuses for placing in different spaces on your hive mat, which is your ship. So yeah, so I would probably go to advance first and pick up a farm or a recruit, depending on what I had around.
Perfect. Yeah, that sounds great. Oh, okay. Yeah, there's a lot of things that you said in there that have me thinking, and I'll maybe kind of like re-dive into that thought a little bit more whenever you pick the carve action, because we'll pick them all. But yeah, no, that's neat. And so I guess the random and or adjacent question that I have to the advance action is kind of what's the name or function of a tile that links to something bee related in real life that sticks out to you that you kind of want to shout out a little bit and discuss.
All right. This is like veering a little bit into like not exactly crude, but just a
Hmm.
hair. I'm gonna talk about the cleansing flight tile, which is one that sticks out the most in my mind. Actually, no, I can't even remember what the tile does in the game right now. But it is a little bit thematic. But a cleansing flight in a hive is basically so in starting in the fall with bees. You will have basically the bees that hatch later in the fall are a little bit different genetically. They are essentially designed to survive the winter. So their anatomy is actually different than spring and
Hmm.
summer bees, which would go out and forage. The winter bees sole objective is to survive the winter. They make it the entire year, which is an incredibly long time in relation to the other bees, and keep the hive warm. I mean, they basically beat their wings. There's like the sort of hive ball that forms in the middle that keeps the very center of the hive up to 80 or 90 degrees throughout the course of the winter. Every once in a while, though, you will get basically a nice warm spring day, and all of the bees will fly out and basically empty all of the waste that they have been holding in for the last 4 months. And so, if you are a beekeeper, you better not park your car like on the flyway because it'll just be covered with all these little brown streaks, and that's what a cleansing flight is. And so, it made it into the game.
That, oh my gosh, I'm gonna see if I can if I type in cleansing flight bees. I just want to see if I can see the tile. No, okay. I'll pull it out of my box later, but that's hilarious.
But that's one of the more it's one of the ones that like sticks out a little bit more in my mind.
Yeah, that's funny. And I mean, yeah, you touched on some of the or just like how special and unique bees are, but it's just crazy how from like an evolutionary and biological standpoint, how these different animals have like different phases or with butterflies and some of their like migration patterns, how some are meant to live for a couple weeks and some are meant to live like over winter at like an overwintering roost. It's just wild that it's
Yeah.
built into their
Yeah.
DNA.
Well, and I'm certainly not the really the best expert to talk about this, but yeah, as you said, it is interesting the sort of genetic memory that these insects have. Because if you think about bees' social structure, it's incredibly complicated. I mean, throughout the course of their lives, which are often just a month or something like that, they will take on different roles based on age. So for the first 7 days of their life, they'll do one activity. They basically go through a few different phases. So they'll be like nurse bees, they'll be cleaning bees, they'll be guard bees, they'll go out and forage, and somehow they just sort of know how to do that. I mean, I remember one of the most fascinating things I've ever seen my bees do, and I remember talking to my mentor about this. We had pulled some frames out to harvest some honey, and by the time we got the frames back in, which was say 20 minutes, half an hour later, something like that, the bees were we opened up the hive and they were stringing themselves across, so basically 6 or 7 bees long in the gaps where the frames had been. And I was talking to my mentor and I was like, okay, what the heck are they doing? And they're measuring. So they're using multiple bee lengths to measure the gap so they can start building. So they basically have the measurements that they need to start building the comb to fill that gap in. And it's like, how the heck? Like, first of all, how do they know to do that? But second of all, like, what is so ingrained that they know, aha, this gap is exactly 6.5 bees long? Um, so anyway, that's just wild to me. I mean, as a human species, um, sorry about that. My cat's feeder just went off. It's an automated feeder. But anyway, how do they know how to do that? I mean, we as humans, it takes us, I don't know, 6 or 7 years to be able to do much of anything.
Yeah, no, I didn't know that necessarily about the bees, but yeah, that's like you said, kind of within that like 20 to 30 minute gap. It's like, all right, we have a job to do. We're getting after it. And bees, you mentioned, I mean, I probably know a little bit more about like butterflies than bees, but yeah, you said it takes us 7 years to do much, but give give a monarch, a 6, 7 hours to dry its wings basically, and it's off to its
Right.
next task. So
Well, and I know monarchs too, what they do, the multi-generational migration. So they'll do this giant migration across the world, but it's lots of different individuals carrying it on. I mean, it's not one butterfly that makes an entire migration, from Mexico up to, I don't know, Canada and back.
mhm.
It'll be a whole series of them, right?
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, no, they'll like the migration pattern like up is couple or few, and then the final one is the one that goes back to Mexico and then does the overwintering. But yeah, and then even this is one that I probably even know less than bees and butterflies about, but my wife has been watching or and listening to a lot of videos on ants and just some of the kind of like newer studies or hypotheses as to like their behaviors and what they're doing. Yeah, I don't know. It's just absolutely wild. And I think it's, yeah, like I said, I mean, that's what like made me interested in Apiary beyond just like big new game and everything like that too. And just seeing some of these touches like the cleansing flight, um, make it like even that much more entertaining. Awesome. Okay, so we have explored and we've advanced. We have well 4 more actions to
Yep.
choose from. So
Yeah. So keeping with the theme of bees, let's go to convert next. It might be a little early in the game, but let's do it. So the first thing that I might do when I get a strength 4 bee. So basically each of the actions has a special bonus action that you can take with a strength 4. That's sort of the bee's last hurrah. And the thing that you can do in the convert space with a strength 4B is you can create your own conversion. Every game you get a couple of different dance tiles that come out that have a sort of a different combination of sort of holes to fill it, sort of like Mad Libs. And then you have a stack of resources to fill them in. And this is obviously drawn directly from the waggle dances that bees do. So if a forager bee finds a really juicy spot to collect pollen, they will come back to the hive, and then the direction and the distance and the pattern in which they waggle communicates the location of that juicy foraging spot to the other bees in the hive, which again is absolutely wild. And even the vigorousness with which they waggle communicates how good the space is. So basically, this is a kind of good space versus this is a really, really amazing space. So anyway, so the concept in Apiary was, well, let's like spice up the spot that otherwise is pretty boring that you kind of need to have in the game. Let's make it a little more interesting so it's player established. And then, thematically, let's sort of kind of play around with this idea of bee evolution a little bit and say, okay, well, let's say bees are sentient now. Maybe these dances have become a really important kind of cultural element in, uh, you know, in honeybee society. So that's kind of where that came from. So one of the first things you can do in the game if you want to is um, when you have a strength 4 bee, you can establish a conversion, which basically, if you have a particularly good line to a resource, you can really benefit from that. And then you get a benefit every time somebody else uses your conversion for the rest of the game.
Yeah, that's really cool. And like you said, the tie-in regarding the vigorousness of the like how nice or lucrative or that makes sense with the game too, because yeah, maybe it's just something that is going to benefit you, or maybe it's something that's like, well, this is going to be like a good conversion for everybody, but then you get to benefit from that as well. So my convert specific question then is actually it's kind of tied to that, and it's actually linking to something that you mentioned previously as well. And when you're introducing Apiary, you mentioned that it did go from real life non-space bees to space bees, and I know that you have kind of talked about this in other capacities as well. But what's kind of maybe even with like a little bit more like hindsight to what's like a particular change that you made from having it, the initial game to the space bees that you really feel like open things up the most like mechanistically for the game?
Yeah, so the big change when the game moved to space was the addition of fiber, or was the addition of fiber and then wax. So when the game was regular honeybees, it was basically you had, oh God, I don't even remember what it was. It was pollen, water, and it was a nectar resource, or maybe it was two types of pollen. I went through a bunch of different, I can't remember what it ended up being. But there was one refined resource into honey. And wax is certainly something that regular bees use, but I think there was kind of a sense when the game was just in regular bees that we maybe needed kind of one more thing. It's sort of a second advanced resource, kind of something that was a little bit intermediate between your basic resources and then your honey, which is very expensive and very valuable. And so the use of wax in the game really was tied to the conversion of the game to space, and that was where the fiber resource came into, which is obviously not something that bees use in real life. The base resources in the game are pollen, fiber, and water. Water is a big one. Bees use a ton of water, pollen, obviously, but the fiber is sort of a new addition for the game, and it was sort of like, okay, well, and this was sort of the mental thought process of like, well, these guys need to build ships. If they're building spaceships, what is some kind of resource that both connects real life bees in the natural world and kind of plant life to, building a spaceship? And so it's like, well, maybe it's some kind of, fiber type resource. So and then that was kind of very much tied to the wax.
Yeah, very neat. I kind of alluded to it already, and I still don't want to like spoil that thought train too much, but I think like one of the things that is really interesting about how like the game plays from like a one game to the next is the variety. So like I said, I'll hop into that a little bit more, but I think from like just kind of that resource standpoint, to actions like the convert and the conversion become extremely important, and just also what comes out in the market for the advanced action that we mentioned too is really going to like dictate what you can do. Obviously, there's a ton of flexibility within the game's frame to use cards or do other things to kind of get like different resources as well as in the Explorer. Like all the interactions make a ton of sense, but kind of like what's out for the farm tiles regarding like how much you can store, what your initial thing is like, it's just going to make the game play out yeah so much differently. And adding those couple of resources, I think Yeah, I mean, obviously I didn't play like a very early version, but yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And there is another kind of question on variety in in a minute too. But I that's one of the
Yeah.
things that I just really like appreciate. You know, one game I maxed out like the Queen's Favor track like to an absurd amount, and some
Yeah.
games I'll be at like two. I'm like, oh, okay,
Yep.
like that,
I'm not doing that. Like, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Well, that is one thing. I tend to like tactical games much more than strategic games, and I certainly like having that through line of strategy. But I mean, I want to be able to kind of identify a target and go for it. As a gamer and as a designer, I tend to not enjoy the game so much where a lot of your first actions are programmed. I mean, you'll have a game like a Brass or a Puerto Rico or something like that, where a lot of your first several actions are very much determined by your seat, especially at high levels of play. And I find that just a little bit less interesting than a game that's just going to be a little bit more dynamic. And so in Apiary, yeah, I mean, you often take an explore action first. You get a bonus for being the first one to get to each space. And also you just kind of need to build up some resources. But a lot of times after that, where you go, it's really dependent, as you said, on which tiles are up, which carvings are available. Those are sort of your end game points, which dances are out, which dances get created, the seed cards you draw. And we haven't talked about those yet, but I do really like that winding your way through the game as presented to you as opposed to planning a lot of your turns from the beginning.
Yes. Yeah, like I'd say from kind of like a gamer mentality standpoint, that's 100% what I gravitate towards as well. And yeah, just seeing the different like stories and arcs that are able to emerge from that is something that I take quite delight in. So that's fun.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we've done. Do you know what's kind of funny? Okay, well, actually, I won't. All right, nonetheless, I won't put it out into the universe. We'll see where your action selection is going. So we've explored, advanced, and converted. What action and randomly associated question do we have next?
Yeah, so the next action that I'd probably go to is now that we've established, and we've skipped a couple turns along the way here, but now that we've established that we've used at least one strength for B to establish dance, I think now I go to grow because this is where I need to start building my bees up again. Maybe I've lost one or two of them. Maybe I've filled up some space in my hive mat. So the grow action lets you do two different things. And it's definitely the least used action in the game. And one thing that I was thinking about when we put together the expansion was like, well, do we do anything to boost grow or it just is what it is. And I think we kind of left it just it is what it is. It's an action that you have to go to a couple times throughout the course of the game. It's how you get more bees. You basically get them back after they hibernate, which of course is an addition that was added for the sci-fi version of the game. In the original game, they just died. Now they hibernate, which is much more pleasant. Um, and it's also how you add extra space. You can basically get more space for your hive to build out. So figuring out exactly when to go to the grow action is pretty important, especially because you want to try to beat other players there so you can get bumped off it so you can get your worker back. So I'd probably go to grow now, maybe trying to beat the rush to get to that space.
Yeah, speaking of timing, I feel like I'm pretty good at apiary. I feel like whenever I try like when in game plan out my grow action, I feel like that's when I mess up. Like am I like that was not the most optimal timing, but
Well,
um
it's tough, and it's tough too because one of the things about the game is your fours are really valuable, and you don't actually get all that many strength four Bs over the course of the game. I mean, it's somewhere going to be like 3 to 5 strength four Bs, depending on player count and how other players are playing. And you really want to send your strength four B to all of the different spaces. I mean, the convert lets you teach a dance. Your explore gives you a special benefit or a bonus. Your grow action, which we're talking about now, lets you upgrade your faction. Every player has an individual faction tile, and there's an upgraded side that's just better on all of them, which you need to send a level strength, a level 4B to that action. And then we'll talk about the last two actions later, but those are a couple of your major sinks for your strength 4Bs as well.
so I guess kind of like keeping on the fact that I mismanage my grow actions enough. This question, I feel like all the other questions, the like the link have made some sense, like with the previous one and the converting and going from like the real piece space piece. I've got like a mental through line that I think makes sense. This one I could stretch to make the connection, but my question here is technically the only thing that I don't really even have written as a question. I just wrote in all caps. I wrote Queen competition because I don't have like I said, I don't have a ton of knowledge of these, but I know enough, and it's my understanding that that queen competition is pretty pretty intense. So I guess just kind of
Yeah. Yeah, so I can talk about that a little bit. And that's not something I thought about putting it into the game, honestly, but it just had nature. Everyone's like, oh, it's natural, it's nice. No, no, no. Nature is like a pretty nasty place. And I didn't really want that kind of nastiness in the game. I actually really thought about including this element in the game, but I just couldn't square it with the kind of gameplay that I wanted it to be. But basically, if you have a queen bee, and the queen bee will live hopefully 5 to 6 years, but lately queen bees don't seem to be living that long. And so every time a queen basically gets old or gets infirm or dies, it's basically a death match to form a new queen. And so oftentimes the hive, like say your queen dies, your hive will basically create 5 or 6 or 7 queens. They basically duke it out to the death. Then the winner basically takes over the hive and does essentially a breeding flight, mates with actually a whole bunch of the male bees, and then will basically spend the rest of her life laying eggs. Um, it's very cool. It's very interesting. It's a little bit grim. So the grow action here is more, you can think of it as hatching um, you know, extra worker bees as opposed to any kind of a larger hive transition.
yeah, that's like super fair. Like I said, I didn't even really 100% link that, but I think it is, yeah, like you said, like mechanistically, thematically, tonally, wasn't from a gameplay standpoint, wasn't what's going on in the game. But yeah, I think I think it has potentially a place in a different game because the way that it was kind of described to me, or at least the analogy or the story, is that it's kind of very like Game of Thrones-ish
Yeah.
in scale, like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and this is where I think if you have I mean, so you can go in a couple from a game design, like let's put on my game designer hat. If you want to have a mechanism like that in a game, I think you want to do one of a couple of things with it. Either I think if you basically, if you're going to have a mechanism like that, you want it to be a really core element of the game. You don't want it to be a tag on. One of my least favorite things in games is like you'll have a big deck of cards and then you have 3 attack cards. And obviously some very popular games like Terraforming Mars and Ark Nova do that, and it drives me nuts. And like in Ark Nova, I'll just like play without those cards, which is an accepted variant, and that's fine. But I think if you're going to have some kind of an aggression mechanism like that, you want it to be very central. You want it to be sort of like almost like a Magic the Gathering type game or something where you're very directly interacting with the other players, or something like Nature, the new game that just came out from North Star, where yeah, I mean predation is a very big part of the game, but it's a very core element in the game. And then also in Nature too, they really soften the blow of what happens if you lose your population and you lose your species. The other direction you could go with it, of course, is like player versus environment. So you are trying to protect your queen against marauding queens or something like that. I mean, that's not really how it works in real life, but I think it's kind of dangerous in a relatively friendly Euro game to introduce some kind of an attack mechanism without doing it very, very carefully.
Yeah, no, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. It would either be something that is completely different, or it would just feel so disconnected from the game that
Yeah,
it would have those feelings like, wait, what? Why are
yeah,
we
yeah.
doing this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only way that you could kind of work it into a Euro style game like this would almost be to have some kind of a changing player power over time. So, sort of like you have a queen bee as your faction, and then at several points over the course of the game, it sort of automatically changes, sort of like you might get a new leader in Through the Ages or something like that. You could sort of really abstract it out like that, but that's not really gonna be the same mechanism. That's gonna be something very different at that point.
Hmm. Oh, that's cool. That is interesting as well. Maybe an expansion. Just kidding.
Maybe.
Don't.
Yeah. But yeah, so the next space that I would head over to is research. And research is kind of an action that you can take when you don't really know what else to do, or if you have a strength 4B, and you get these things called seed cards. Seed cards are multi-use cards. They all have like a one-time ability on them. You can play them kind of before or after your turn. And it might be something like collect resources or do a conversion or buy a tile or something like that. I mean, the effects on them, you also have some worker manipulation, reuse a bee, recall a bee without aging it, extra age a bee, things like that. Um, They also will just give you a resource if you don't want to use them for their ability. And that's a little bit of an underrated ability because they're resources that you don't have to store. Your storage is pretty tight in your game, oftentimes, depending on how you build. And so if you have a hand of 3 or 4 seed cards, that's 3 or 4 extra resources that you don't have to store. Then the other thing that cards do is you can actually tuck them. These are all kind of, this represents bees researching the natural world. And so if you go to the research action with a strength 4B, you can tuck a seed card under your map, and then that unlocks an additional scoring condition for you. So a lot of what you're doing throughout the game is trying to align different scoring conditions. So you're targeting a carved tile, and then let's see if I can find a seed card that synergizes well with that. So the next thing I might do, if I have a strength 4B, I might be looking to tuck a card I already have, or I might be looking to pick up some more cards to use for the future, either to give myself an extra scoring condition or to just give myself a pretty powerful ability. I mean, some of the most powerful seed cards in the game are the ones that let you reuse your strength 4Bs. You essentially can pluck your strength 4B off the board without aging it, which means you get an extra kind of bonus action.
Yeah, that's very neat. And yeah, I'm just trying to think. I don't know. When you're like kind of like retelling, I'm just thinking about if there's like any particular plays or moves that I've done that like have made a ton of sense. But I know that in one of my more recent games, I was like things were looking pretty dire for me. And speaking with the variety, like the person I was playing against had a lot of their starting action tile gave them a lot of like reserved tiles and a
Mm-hmm.
lot of
Yep.
the which like allowed them to be able to kind of plan and get the scoring tiles out that made like most sense for them. So I was kind of like almost like clawing from behind the whole time
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and with like some decent strategic play or tactical play, not decent tactical play, I was actually able to get it close, but I lost.
Okay.
And some of that was with some good seed card use on my part, but I tried my best.
Well, that is one of the different kind of the trade-offs with these different types of games too, that there's a real kind of trade-off between like certainty and variance in some of these games, that by having a lot of different elements of variance, by having very tactical play, by having all of these different factions, um, it increases the overall variance in a play, which does unfortunately mean that not every game is going to be even. There are certainly going to be games where everything is just going to flop right in favor of one person. I think from a game design standpoint, there's a really interesting question there about like how on rails do you want a game to be? Like the more on rails it is, the smaller the variance is among the different tiles, among the different cards, among the different pieces of your game, the closer every game is going to be, both to each other, but also within players within a game. But then also, kind of, what do you lose? What do you lose with that? If you make a game entirely on rails, I've played a lot of games where every action is between 1.75 and 2.25 points. And then, every turn you're sort of like, okay, well, let me try to find the 2.25 points. And Apiary is not like that. I mean, it's a big combo game, which does sometimes mean that some people's combos pop off more than others, and so there's a real kind of game design trade-off there. And I don't really have any answers, but I just wanted to sort of note that.
Yeah, I mean when it comes to game design, well I don't have an answer for that because anything that is shaking around in my head regarding game design is like 100% not in the space. It's in absolute some other land. But like as a player though, yeah, I don't know. I think just kind of by the way that I've maybe comment on the way that I like to play like this game and other games, like I really I invest into the narrative and like seeing what's going to happen. So I mean, obviously I want to win when I'm playing, like I that's my goal. But at the same time, like I'm not going to crunch the numbers and see if I'm hitting between, 1.75
Yeah,
and
yeah.
2.25, or I'm just like, I think this is a very intuitive. Like this is what I'm going
Yeah.
for. I'm just gonna I'm
Well, and
just
I,
gonna
I
go.
think, and I do think there's something nice about a lot of these Euro games that hide a lot of the scoring until the very end of the game. I always think of Wingspan as being a really good example of that. Like you can build a really good bird sanctuary, or you can build a really bad bird sanctuary. It doesn't really matter much. I mean, in terms of how you feel when you're playing the game, which I think is the beauty of the game, and like realistically speaking, because you total up all the points at the end. I mean, if you're really paying attention and you're really playing strategically, like, yeah, you're behind. But you don't have to sort of sit there being like, I'm losing, I'm losing, I'm losing. You're just like, no, I'm doing a thing. I'm building out my birds. I'm doing my thing. And I think that especially for slightly kind of cozier, less aggressive games is a really nice element to kind of get people out of their own heads. So like, yes, you have to compare scores at the end, but it's really again, it's like not to sound too trite, but it's about the journey more than the destination.
Awesome. That ties, I mean, that all, well, hopefully kind of ties into my one linked research question then as well. And that is kind of like regarding research and Wyrmspan, which is a game that I don't have like a ton of experience with. I know that it exists. I know some of
Yes,
the
yeah, that's
mechanisms
fun.
and changes
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah,
everything
yeah.
like that. But I guess like it's very cool too is that you can kind of touch on this a little bit more, but your design debut with Apiary and Wyrmspan was pretty close. I
Yeah.
don't know the exact, date gap in like
Yeah,
announced
they were like
release.
they were released like 4 months apart or something like that.
Yeah. So that's like super cool, like being able to have like both your big designs come out at once. But I think the parallels between, research and then, integration of your knowledge of, bees and having that go into the design for apiary, and then taking something that is, from Wingspan that has a lot of bird-based research, but then something like dragons is something that would take, like a whole different type of research, exploring
Mhm.
into something that is, like extremely fictitious, but also has like a
Yeah,
ton of lore
a
and
ton of
background.
lore.
Like,
Yeah, yeah, from all over the world too, which is really fascinating. And we really tried to represent dragons from a lot of different mythologies in the game. I mean, you have your kind of standard Northern European dragons in that game. We have a lot of your Asian dragons. We have some South American dragons. Like we tried to kind of pull in as many different types of lore as we could. And that's sort of interesting too to have that kind of, as you said, it's a fictional subject, but with an awful lot of lore. I mean, I just remember some of one of the resources in Wyrmspan is milk, and milk goes with the hatchling dragons or the baby dragons. And in part, I was looking for a resource that we knew we were going to have these baby dragons in there. And I wanted a resource that is just very clearly, hey, this is for the babies. Like, when you look at this resource exactly what it's for. You don't have to think about, like, oh, is it the purple crystals or the red crystals? Like, which crystals are for the babies? So it just kind of cuts out that cognitive load by having that heuristic. And my thought process behind it was like, okay, a big part of the reason mammals need milk is because they're warm-blooded. And if you're a warm-blooded creature, you have a really high caloric need as a baby animal in a way that like your reptiles, for instance, that are cold-blooded aren't. In an awful lot of lore, not all lore, but an awful lot of lore, dragons are warm-blooded or in fact hot-blooded. And so I was like, well, maybe something similar would evolve in dragons if you're treating dragons as like a serious, like, let's pretend dragons evolved in the real world as some kind of kind of in parallel with the mammals. That kind of made a lot of intellectual sense to me. Stonemeyer was cool with it. I think in part because of the gameplay, it just makes the gameplay a lot clearer. And some of the debates I think that kind of surfaced on the internet when Wyrmspan was released about that were really interesting. Because I mean, there were some people who were mad. They're like, dragons are reptiles. They don't drink milk. Like, what are you talking about? And then people were pointing to examples of dragon milk in fantasy. I mean, this is not the first time it's popped up. And then other people were like, "Oh my God, this is fiction." Both sides that cool it. It was just kind of it was a really funny debate to see.
that's awesome. I mean, like Wormspan has been very high on my, track down, buy, play list for a while, and I kind of want to, well, I definitely want to even more so now, uh, check it out, play it, and dive into the comments, which is a scary place to live
It's a
sometimes.
scary place to live these days.
That's fantastic. But yeah, that's really cool. I think I just thought the kind of like the parallels, but almost the inversion and like the way that they interacted with kind of like the knowledge and the research. I don't know. I thought it was really neat. But that means, speaking of research done, we have one more one more action before we can, hibernate and move to
Yeah,
like the checkout questions. So
yeah.
we got one more.
Yeah, the last action is carve, and this is always going to be the last action to talk about because in some ways it's sort of the pinnacle of what you're working toward in the game. This is an action that you can only go to with a strength 4B. And this is basically how you convert honey into points at the end of the game. It's not the only way. I mean, you can actually do very well in the game without getting any carvings at all, but they are kind of the most direct, like, especially on a first play, the most direct way of like, this is how you get points, go buy a carving. And the carvings could a lot of times they score for other things that you have done. I mean, for tiles in your hive, for things that are adjacent, for resources that you might have, for positions on there's a track called the Queen's Favor track. You can score for position on that, stuff like that. And so a lot of times the game is about identifying one or two or three carvings. Carvings aren't replaced either. So once they're purchased for the game, they're just gone. You get a random distribution at the beginning of the game, but once they're gone, they're gone. So a big part of the game is often about targeting one or two or three carvings that you're really looking for and then trying to build toward that carving and then also snatch it before somebody else takes it.
Yeah, that's really great. And like I think, the kind of like the follow-up question that I have here is one that I was struggling to like stay away from. Like I kept like talking about like this idea throughout, but I mean I think, the like you said, whatever carved tiles like exist for the game are going to be just like unique to that game, and then they're going to be gone. Like they're not replaced, which is just going to continue to add to like the variety between the different setups, the faction tile, hive mats, other tiles available in advanced area. And so I know from listening to you on other podcasts, following your social media, watching Stonemeyer videos and everything like that, that your process regarding design, iteration, and play testing is, I don't know, I'd call it like very like meticulous, kind of like based on like all
Yeah.
of my observations. So kind of like I think too when you well I would assume, because again, different different like I yeah, that you are really going to be working then to strike a balance between variety, volume, and balance.
Yeah.
So I guess kind of that's not a question, but that is also then the question.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about that a little bit. So, fairly early on in the design of Apiary, I decided that I didn't want the carved tiles to flip out over the course of the game. I mean, I think there's nothing more frustrating as a player than something flips out and it's perfect for somebody and it gives them, 10, 20, 30 points. And you're like, cool, well, they were sitting in that spot when that tile flipped out. And because the carvings are definitely like on an individual tile, individual action basis, the kind of highest conversion of, stuff into points that's in the game, I wanted those to kind of all be known at the beginning so you don't have that kind of seat ordering, flipping advantage. And so that was kind of a key element in the game. And then the carvings are all kind of a ratio. They all cost one, two, or three honey. Honey is an expensive resource to get. It's also a difficult resource to store. You start with two spaces to store honey, but then if you want to ever say buy a carving that costs three honey, you need to get some more storage to be able to store that. And so it's sort of a conversion of all right, how many points is an individual honey worth? Then you also have the action, but then you also have the additional complexity in storing the honey if you have those level three carvings. And it's been sort of interesting to hear some of the discourse on one of the carvings in particular. People think is a little bit strong. It's called retinue. It gives you 1 point per space on the Queen's Favor track. The Queen's Favor track goes up to 25 points, so it's one tile that can give you 25 points. It also costs you three honey though, which is very expensive. And I've done the math on this like a million times, and because we thought about changing it for the expansion and we didn't. And I was like, look, there's no universe that this tile should be less than 19 or 20 points. I mean, it's three honey. Like that's your conversion. That's your rate for three honey. And so at that point in a game that often scores 100 or more points, you're quibbling about the difference between, say, 19 points and a max of 25 points. For a tile that is open information that everyone sees at the beginning of the game and can go for accordingly. So that's it's been sort of interesting to see what people think is potentially overly strong in the game.
Yeah. And I think I did mention that one game where I did completely max out the Queen favor track. I did have
Yes.
that
Yep.
tile. So I like
Yep.
made sure that was what I built my
Yep.
strategy around. So like
Right.
yeah.
Well, it's costly to go up the Queen's Favor track. I mean, you are spending a lot of actions to go up that track that you could be doing other things with. So it's not like it's a free 25 points once you buy that tile. It's something that you have to build your strategy around. And I'll mention too that the track just caps out at 25. If you go over 25 bumps, you get nothing for it, which is also something that's very hard to time at the end of the game. And so even if you get to that 25 points, which is really satisfying, you're also potentially being very inefficient. You either risk not getting up to the top of the track, which is very punishing in terms of a point standpoint, because it's sort of a track that ratchets up the points as you go higher. But also, if you overshoot it, you have a lot of wasted actions at the end of the game. So again, I'm comfortable with where it's at, but I know some people on the internet would disagree.
Awesome. Okay, well, we are now the we are ascended bees. We are uh 4 strength. We are tired. We are done with our work, and we are hibernating. And that'll lead us to just kind of like the two kind of wrap up questions. And the final question I have, I'll maybe add just like a little bit more to, but I have a penultimate question, and it's just always my second to last thing, and that's like text based. So I think this works really well because you mentioned exploring a little bit more. It was sci-fi at the beginning, right? That's what you're wanting to read, or is it fantasy? Did I miss?
Both. I mean, I
Oh,
do. I read a lot of both science fiction and fantasy. That tends to be what I where I land in my spare reading time.
awesome. So this question though, it doesn't have to be about a book, but I mean it could be. I always want to ask, just kind of in the spirit of the show's name and everything like that, and connecting uh, games to real life and other texts and everything like that as well, is what is something that you have either been reading, watching, listening to, or playing that's kind of like stuck out to you?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to talk about a TV show because I'm obsessed with this show right now. And this is gonna be weird, but I would say I cannot recommend it strongly enough, particularly for anyone who's interested in game design. It's called The Devil's Plan on Netflix, and it's a terrible name because it has nothing to do with devils or demonics or anything. It's a competition show. It's all in Korean, and it's one of these shows that I think would never ever fly in the US because it is the most board game coded show I have ever seen in my life. I mean, the first episode of the first game is essentially a really elaborate mafia game, but it's basically if mafia had 10 times the amount of rules that it does. And they just throw these contestants into it. And there's like, these terrorists and then the researchers that are trying to find a cure, and the disease is spreading in a certain like distinct pattern. And it's basically all logic games and logic puzzles and board games in a competition show. And I've never watched a show that I've been like so invested in. There's a lot of good twists and turns. The games themselves are just very, very interesting. I mean, my husband and I have been watching it with a piece of scratch paper, and we've been like playing the games along with the people, which it shows how nerdy we are because a lot of them are just math puzzles. They're math and logic combined. But it's really interesting to me that a show like this got made because they're really complicated games. I mean, a lot of times they'll kind of teach the rules and then they'll give the players an hour or so essentially with the rule book to figure out what they're doing before they then jump into the game. And it's usually a combination of kind of the math element and then also some kind of a social deduction. So, yeah, that one is just really, really interesting. So I wanted to call it out.
Nice. I don't know. I feel like I don't know if I've heard of this or not, or if my brain's playing tricks on me or whatever. I know that in the past I've had a couple, at least one guest has mentioned the TV show Traders, and I know
Okay,
that
I have
there's like
not
a
watched that one. Yeah.
okay, and I know that I think there's a couple ones, so it's like Traders UK, and maybe
Mhm.
another like location. But part of the reason why that stuck out to them was due to the fact that it had some of those social deduction, like kind of board game tie-in links. And so I don't know if it's because of that why I feel like I have heard of the Devil's Plan or not. I don't know. But nonetheless,
Yeah.
it's on my radar. That sounds beyond intriguing.
Yeah, and I get a little frustrated with some of the social dynamics. I'm much more interested in like the mechanical aspects of the games than I am the like, social, the shifting alliances and stuff like that. And there's certainly a certain amount of that in there too, but it's just it's really caught my attention. Like I think I have not gotten caught by a TV show in quite some time.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm always like between looking for a show and always behind on like 80 of them. So I'll
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah.
add that to the
Understood.
list. Okay, and then the final question, and this works well with a kind of a previous topic and kind of transitioning to, like I said, we are level four. I'm not sure if the metaphor analogy works 100%, but we're hibernating, moving on. And you mentioned that you have moved from a uh, full-time position in, sorry, like
Yep.
law.
Yeah. I was an attorney for the federal government for about 11 years, ever since I graduated from law school until a month ago.
Yeah. And so I guess just kind of the final question I usually have is linked to, things to look out for from you
Yeah.
going forward with, design full time. I don't, and it's always tricky because I know that certain things you can talk about, certain things you can't. But if you just want to talk about
Yeah.
that transition and and or things that you've been working on,
Yeah,
go
yeah,
for it.
absolutely. So I have several games under contract right now, which I'm very excited about. Apiary and Wyrmspan obviously came out back to back. And Wyrmspan in particular came out incredibly quickly. The lag time between when I finished that game and when it came out was incredibly short, in part because they did the art simultaneously with the design. So I was pens down at the same time the artist was pens down, and then it immediately went into, post-production. A lot of other games you do the design first and then you have 6 months, 8 months, a year while the art's being done. So I have several things under contract. Unfortunately, I can't really talk about anything right now. The one thing that is announced is the Wyrmspan expansion, which is coming out. I think the details are being announced in about a month for that, give or take. So that's really exciting. A lot of what I'm working on now, I'm taking on a little bit of sort of contracting type work. Rulebook editing is very in line with my legal skill
Oh.
set, and it's something that I really enjoy doing. Also some development work. But mostly what I'm focusing on now is just getting a bunch more games that have been, floating around and rattling around in the back of my head without the bandwidth to work on them, getting them out of my head and onto paper and playtesting them sort of as quickly as possible. So it's really nice to make a lot of much faster progress on a lot of these projects right now. And then I think really time will tell if this is going to be a viable career path or not longer term. This, full disclosure, is not really the timeline that I wanted to make this transition on. But as folks might expect, work in the federal government was pretty bad. It's been terrible. I was a grants attorney, and a big part of me being a grants attorney was wanting to help people, basically giving money to communities and people in need. That was what we did. And the last couple of months that I was in the federal government, we were basically doing nothing but politically motivated grant terminations. And that's just not something that I can like ethically and morally support. And so at that point, it's like, well, I needed to do some kind of a transition, sort of morally, ethically, etc. I had to do something else. And this is something that I wanted to wait a couple of years to do, but definitely something that I wanted to sort of, I felt like I owed it to myself to give it a shot. And then obviously with Apiary and then Wyrmspan in particular, I have a little bit of a buffer to be able to give it a shot. So I'm going to try it for a year or so and then see where we're at.
Well, I'm yeah, super sorry that the state of the country, world, your job soured so quickly. Kind of, and that just makes, all, I don't know, it's just tough. Like I can't even imagine like how much of like a quick like you had to process that and digest that, and yeah, that's just like a no good thing. But
Yeah, it's unfortunate. And there's obviously an awful lot of really good people in federal government who are really struggling with this kind of stuff right now. And there aren't a lot of easy answers. 3.5 years at best is a long time for some of the stuff. So I think we're obviously in a bit of a tough environment right now. And there's a part of me that's a little bit, I don't love just shoving my head in the sand, which is essentially what I'm doing by jumping ship. But again, I think there's, it's very easy outside from the outside to say, oh, stand and fight, hold your ground. But unfortunately, an awful lot of federal employees are at least in the legal field, are all at will employees. And so essentially you do what is being ordered of you, or you get fired for cause, which is not a really a path that you want to go down. So unfortunately, I think options for fighting from the inside are pretty limited right now.
yeah, that's does not sound like a good situation at all. But I guess
But it's
on
an
the
opportunity,
yeah,
right? It's an opportunity. So
on the flip side, I really am excited to, like you said, the Worms span expansion, and then some of these unannounced things. I'm beyond excited to see what's coming next from you, and I'm very appreciative of you uh, taking taking your time to guide me on this intergalactic space bee journey. And I'm excited to go back and play the game more with just like a new like mind frame and hearing all of your thoughts. Yeah, I just had a great time.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks. Me too. Me too. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Intertextual Experience, the most bees podcast about board games and any other text that they connect to. Thank you so much for spending your time here. Your support through listening to this podcast means everything to the show's success. If you enjoyed the project, consider giving us a rating or review and sharing it with any other people in your life you would feel would like it as well. Any further support, such as sending an email to say hey, following some of the show's social media accounts, or contributing any monetary support to help pay for some necessary subscriptions would be greatly appreciated. All of that information can be found in the show notes. Until next time, keep playing, watching, reading, listening, experiencing.